Grab that Thrustmaster. It's time to fly for the Confed. All this and more this week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
The passing of a legend.
Brand new DIY computer inspired by Sir Clive.
Wing Commander IV Remastered. All this and more on This Week in Retro.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello, chaps. Another week, another weekend as this show comes out on Saturdays, and we'll pretend that we record it just before it's released on a Saturday.
Is it not Saturday?
That's slick and professional. It honestly doesn't take all week for us to record this and edit it up and have the show that comes out, honestly. But it's been a good week. We've just had in the cave a patron event, so all of the official cave dwellers came. Full house. It was fantastic, and it was the first time we got to give people the tour of the arcade that we're building. Alex was such a natural at giving people the tour. He really has got the gift at talking to people,
like
and
you.
just like me, and just sharing all that knowledge he has about the history of these arcade games. So I think people really enjoyed it, and it was nice to see. We had 30 bodies in the arcade. And it was nice to see there was room for them. I was worried that, once you got the retro, the meat in there, as we've called it before, the meat in the retro sandwich, that there wouldn't be room for the cabinets and it would look cramped. But it was fine. So that's great. And we've got lots more cabinets arriving this week.
I'm blown over by them. I really am blown over by the cabinets that are coming. It's just everything. It's just a wish list of cabinets you wouldn't even dare hope they'd be this good. It's incredible.
Beautiful. It really is tipping into that museum experience, not just an arcade. It's like a real step-by-step history through arcades. So it's fantastic to see that coming along, and Alex is doing a great job. Then we had the rest of the patron day, and then we went for a curry. What's an acceptable amount of time to go, chaps? I'm going way off topic from retro here, but I need to get this off my chest. What's an acceptable amount of time to wait from the moment of arriving at a curry house to having your food in front of you?
30 minutes.
Probably about 40 minutes is the longest.
40 minutes?
Assuming they come in and say, let's get you a drink, let's get you the menu, are you ready to order? There you go. 40 minutes. At 40 minutes, you're kind of looking at your watch thinking, is this going to be any longer?
I also have to spend some time arguing with the waiter that, in fact, it is safe for me to have a Vindaloo and I'm not going to die. I do have that conversation quite frequently. But yeah, 30 minutes in my view.
Yeah, maybe a poppadom and a pint of Cobra while you're waiting for the food to come out.
Yeah.
Bit of chat, yeah. Well, 2 hours. 2 hours is how long it took. In fact, just over 2 hours is how long it took. And I think it took about an hour to actually order the food, at which point the chap said... right, does anyone want any starters? And there was just a universal, no. If we order starters, we're going to be here for 5 hours. 2 hours. It was awful. Anyway, got that off my chest. Let's move on to more positive things. Chris, you've got a train behind you on your screen today.
Trains.
Hang on, how was the curry? Was the curry worth the wait?
I was so hungry it didn't touch the sides, so it just filled a space.
That's probably why they did it. Probably it was dodgy food day. It was the leftovers from the day before.
Also, if you went up to the facilities and used the toilet, this was brilliant. The toilet door had a perfect cut in the door in the shape of a toilet, because they'd obviously installed the door, and then realised the door wouldn't open.
What?
So when you open the door...
What?
The shape of the toilet was in the door so that the door could go through the toilet.
I like that.
Of course, it meant you had a toilet-sized hole if you sat on the toilet.
I'm so confused. Anyway,
we won't be going back there again. Trains.
Yes, it's this
trains.
week in trains. I'm hijacking the show. Remember at the start when I first came over and started helping you present on here, and I tried to segue into cars. It's trains now, Neil. Sorry.
Yeah.
So we're going to ditch computers, and no, some of the stuff I bought back over from England, some of my toys from my past. So it is sort of retro and nostalgia related. But I bought some of my Hornby trains over with me. So I've just, in all honesty, that's what I've been playing about with computers, and games have taken a sideline, and I've been on the floor, on the carpet, setting up tracks that go round and round. And even the wife has gone, so what do you do with it when you've set it up? And I go, well, you watch them go round and round. I don't understand why that's a problem. So, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, Chris, if you treated your train sets like pristine, I guess, boxed microcomputers, and you never took them out. But clearly you do. You get them out, you spread them out on the floor. But I bet you put them back perfectly in the box, don't you?
Well, the box, I'm actually surprised to see that I still had the box for the Intercity 125 set that I had, but it was fairly crushed up in my parents' loft. So, no, I used to play with that back in the day, and it'll be happily played with again. The fact that the box exists is just pure fluke. I've got a modern one, though, the Flying Scotsman set. That's a modern one that I bought for my dad, and so now it's mine, been passed down to me, and that is brand new, so that will probably all go back in the box. Yeah, but no, at some stage I'll be finding a piece of chipboard, setting out a whole layout, tacking it all down like you're meant to, and annoying the wife with taking up even more space in the house with another hobby. So yeah, I'm excited.
Dave,
maybe she's going to insist that you have a strike.
Oh, Dave.
Nice.
Dave, can you out-nerd train sets?
Other than everything we talk about in here, no, no, I don't think I can. I've honestly never seen the appeal of it. I mean, I can see when you see the people having complicated setups that they've made things by hand and so on. It's nice to have a quick look at it for a few minutes, but the amount of work that goes into it doesn't seem to. I don't get it. So I'm not on board your train.
I suppose you can compare it to a lot of what we do, which is, sometimes the pleasure is in repairing the system, and then once you've fixed it and cleaned it up and it's looking like new, you don't actually do that much on it. So I imagine there's a lot of crossover. Getting it just right,
trying to find some peace and order in a complicated life.
That's it. That's what it's about. Yeah, having some control. What have you been up to, Dave?
Well, I did finish that game I talked about last week, which I really enjoyed. I've now forgotten the name of, but I enjoyed it, the 3D one.
Right.
Yeah, fantastic. It was a good game.
If you know what game Dave is talking about, then please leave a comment.
Well, I watched a video on YouTube, and I watched a video on YouTube with an Australian, and when he's back in the UK, if he nudges me, I will give you anything you need to get your Pentium 2 system, your Celeron, up and running. It looks as if it needed a new power supply or more bits. I have lots of bits. I'd love to get you up and running in that when you're back in England.
Oh, nice. Fantastic.
So give me a little dunt when it's time for that.
Yeah, cool. We'll tee something up.
Excellent. Should we move into this week's stories?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
We start this week off with a story submitted by listener Mr. Costado. Hello, Costado. It's some sad news this week, and it's becoming more and more frequent as the pioneers of the industry age with us. And it's all about the passing of a man who I think he would have stopped us in our tracks, all of us, as we walk down the aisles of newsagents or corner shops, just through the power of his artwork. It is, of course, Oliver Frey, or Ollie as he's known to his friends, the artist behind the illustrations that we saw on Crash Magazine, Zap 64, Amtix, and just about any other magazine that we saw out there. If he touched it, it oozed coolness, especially those Crash and Zap 64 magazines. And it will likely come as no surprise that he was a fan of comics in his youth. That style is very clear in the art that he does, particularly The Eagle. That was his comic of choice, apparently. And even in the early 80s, he got to work on some comics. He got to work on Dan Dare, as well as a comic series, which I know I've seen Mr. Costado talk about over on Discord, Tales from the Trigon Empire. Now, that one passed me by. Dave, are you familiar with that one? I know you've got a few comics in your collection.
I did read The Eagle, the second release of The Eagle in the 80s. I must have, I think he worked there or did something for it. So I must have seen the Dan Dare stuff there. I did read it. My dad originally read The Eagle, but I don't recall it. It was so long ago. I was very, very young. It was maybe 6 or 7 years old. So I don't really remember it.
Sure. He also did other work under the pen name of Zach. He illustrated erotic fiction. But I think for our audience, it would mostly be those 8-bit micro magazines that really did stick with us. So let's, I think, celebrate his life and some of his art. And remember, this is a podcast, so we might need to be descriptive when talking about the art for our audio-only
Ideal
listeners.
topic for a podcast, isn't it?
Ideal. So I thought we could just pick out some of the art that stands out for us. And I'm happy to go first. I mean, there are, if we're thinking about, well, when we think about Ollie Frey, my mind immediately goes to Crash Magazine. I know he did other work, but that's where it stands out for me. I'm just going to pick the Barbarian cover. That was from Crash issue 41. It's the one that depicts a barbarian covered in blood. His opponent's on his knees. He's got a sword held to his opponent's throat, and he's about to finish the fight. And I think this one stuck out for me because it's gory. Of course, it's gory. There's blood all over this barbarian. It's not the only one by Ollie to be gritty and blood covered and gory, of course. But when you saw this, or when I saw this on the shelf mixed with all the other computer magazines, you had other magazines that were super serious. They had computers on the front cover. They had businessmen holding luggable computers going, "This is the future." And it was all a bit predictable in its nature. So when you saw Ollie's artwork on a Crash magazine, it just stood out from the crowd. And as a kid, it wasn't talking down to me, you know. It wasn't trying to be highbrow in any way. It was just fun, and it was gory, and it was on my level. In fact, it was above my level. I looked up to it and respected it. It wasn't talking down to me, as I said. So it was enough, I would say, to make me want a ZX Spectrum as an Amstrad owner. I know he illustrated Amtix as well, but
calm down, hang on.
nearly made me want to have a ZX Spectrum. Such was the power of his art. So yeah, and it's actually in later years that I started collecting Crash magazine, driven, I would say, in part by his art. Just, you know, I've got many magazines which I haven't had the time to pick up and read yet, but I lay them out just so I can see that cover art. And of course, he did illustrations. It wasn't just about the cover art. He did illustrations inside the magazines as well. But yeah, the Barbarian one, I remember vividly in W.H. Smith seeing on the shelves and standing out. A very, I guess, a personal memory. It's not saying it's the best piece of art he ever did. It just stood out for me. Yeah, Dave, how about you? What memories did you have of Ollie's artwork?
I used to buy Amstrad Action and then ST Amiga format and then ST format, and I missed out on the artwork. I tended to go for the more clickbaity front pages, the more kind of, here's the value we're going to give you in this. So they typically used that rather than the more cerebral artwork, the more creative, inspiring artwork that he did, or they used artwork from the big game they were reviewing. He worked for Newsfield's set of magazines, which was Crash, Zap, and Amtix, as you've already mentioned, and Amtix was the Amstrad one. I have only recently learned that there was a sort of a tie-in with 2000 AD, which is a gritty British comic that Judge Dredd, among other things, came from. And they wrote a comic for it, and he illustrated it, and it was split into 12 parts in 4 pages each, and put in a Crash, and then later into Zap. So I'm going to look that out. I've got the magazine somewhere in one format or another, so I'm going to look that out and have a look at that, because that sounds interesting. But I must have at least have bought some issues of Amtix, because I remember Amtix Accolade, which was their award for a good game. That definitely rings a bell. And I don't think I was especially loyal to any one magazine. I just took whatever was promised the most on the cover and later the cover disc. So there's 3 covers I want to talk about, and 2 of them I had back in the day. The first one is from issue 13 in November 87 of Amtix, and it's a fantastic spaceship drawing. And I always liked that type of art, particularly around games, because it lets your imagination fill in the gaps when you're playing the games. It's a round metallic spaceship with several windows in the front and lasers shooting out from the front. The lasers are bright white, and you can see the reflection in the light of the metallic ship. But because of the position of the 8 windows on the ship, it looks very much like an insect or arachnid, especially with some of the bits sticking out looking like antenna or legs.
I don't have the picture of that in front of me, but just from the way you're describing it, I think that's related to the Hewson Soft game, of which I can't remember the name right now, but I can see it now. Do you know the game I'm talking about?
I'm wondering if I can keep on talking long enough to look it up and pretend that I did. I'm going to find out.
Cybernoid.
Yes.
Is it a red ship with... No. Okay. Well, there's another one that he does, which was for the review of Cybernoid on the front of Crash, and it's a round red ship with lasers shooting out, and almost like the universe is exploding behind him, or some starship that he's blown up. He really captures those space scenes well, doesn't he?
Yeah, this is. I'm not sure if it's related to a game. I'm not sure it's related to a specific game or if it's in the magazine. But this one's kind of a grey metallic color. So that's great. And the other two that I thought were kind of similar and quite appropriate. The one that I remember is on the final issue of Amtix before it was merged into another magazine, and it's of a CPC 464 made to look like a huge, enormous spaceship, and the distant part of it is exploding in the middle of an asteroid belt. So it's obviously it's a life-size 464 because that's how big they really are. And this was the final issue of Amtix, and it's only now that I realise that the very first issue of Amtix, which I didn't see back in the day because it came out before I got my 6128, it had the same scale of CPC 464 taking off from a planet. So it looks, with a couple of people on a rock watching it, so it looks as if he'd cleverly made the start and the finish of Amtix, this 464 spaceship taking off and then finally blowing up. And if you actually look at Chris Wilkins' re-release of Amtix, he's used a zoomed-in part of it there, so you can see the 464 spaceship taking off when thrusters coming out the bottom of it. So I thought that was quite impressive because it's because of the start and finish of Amtix.
There's some good continuity, yeah. And you mentioned that re-release of Amtix because, of course, Ollie was good friends and working closely in more recent years with Chris Wilkins over at Fusion Retro Books.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in the new versions of Amtix, unique pieces of artwork that they were selling of Ollie's, signed, not signed, framed, all the rest of it, then check out Fusion Retro Books because you'll find a lot of really awesome stuff there.
I would encourage people to subscribe to Amtix CPC because I want it to be a success and continue because I like it and I wanted to keep going.
Yeah, they've got some lovely binders for them as well. New binders for the new Amtix. Looks great. Another thing that Ollie did really well was he could put a unique take on existing characters that we were familiar with. So if you ever saw the artwork for Turrican, it was instantly familiar as this is the character from Turrican. Does the character from Turrican have a name, or is it just called? Are they just called Mr. Turrican?
I think, if I remember right, it's called Neil.
Neil. Okay, yeah, must be. Awesome name. No, Ollie managed to really capture the essence of how the game felt to play while creating a completely new looking character that was new and yet familiar at the same time. Likewise with Barbarian and so many other games. I mentioned Cybernoid. He was able to take the blocky graphics of an 8-bit game and just really bring them to life. He did that so well.
Yeah, if I go back to what I was mentioning about filling in the gaps in your head, that's the kind of thing that helps. When we saw the magazines, we saw the artwork there, we saw the game box and all the rest of it, and then we played the game, we kind of filled in the gaps in the game with the artwork.
Yeah.
And Ollie had the skill to actually fill those gaps and then put pen to paper and illustrate them in a way that I would never be able to do, even with my best crayon hand. He was so talented in what he did. Chris, how about you? Tell us about your memories of Ollie Frey illustrations inside mags that perhaps captured your imagination.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, similar to Dave, I'd never read any of those magazines. I was more a Sinclair user or your Sinclair.
Very serious
during the 8-bit, and then obviously with the Amiga, it was Amiga format all the way. Whilst playing with train sets in between, not even joking. Radio control car, street hockey. Let's not even go into my other hobbies from back then. But obviously, I would have seen them in the shops, so I've had to have a point of reference. What was connected to Oliver Frey's work. So what I've used today is just oliverfreyart.com, and just to browse through the images that I can see there, so I can get a look at his artwork. And some of the ones that really stood out for me, one is the Elite image. So I believe this was from issue 1 of Zap 64, according to the website.
One for Elite.
Yeah, and it's 1985. And just like you guys were just saying, the artwork, whether it was box artwork or if it was from a magazine cover or a magazine article, that artwork really did fill in the gaps. And I hadn't really considered that until you guys were just discussing it there. with this particular image because now we've got things like Elite Dangerous, and we've had all the, you had Frontier, you had First Encounters and all that kind of thing. So we've had the graphics to sort of fill in the details, whereas back in 1985, well, it was mostly wireframe, wasn't it? Elite on the 8-bits, or at the very best, it was flat shade poly on 16-bit systems later on. So when you look at this artwork, I mean, it's got a beautiful starscape in the background. You've got a little bit of, clouding, nebulas and whatever. You've got just the corner, just the hint of a planet or a moon, and you've got what I assume is the Cobra right in front and center, using beam lasers against whichever ship it's just exploded. So, even though it's a static image, because of course it is, it's artwork, there's so much movement in this. There's other ships coming towards the Cobra, firing pulse lasers, not pulse lasers, what are they? Beam lasers, forget the other one that you call it. Yeah, it is pulse lasers, isn't it? Yeah.
It's pulse laser, yeah.
So,
unless it's mining lasers or military lasers.
So there's just so much going on in this one simple image, and that was, the cover image for issue 1. And what that strikes me as, it just reminds me of, that could have been a promotional piece for any sci-fi movie or TV series of the time. It just fits right in. It reminds me of Buck Rogers. It reminds me of Star Wars. It reminds me of Star Trek. They all had that similar art style in the way they drew the ships. Got the light coming from. How do you generate light in a graphic image? They just did it so well. With the use of white and then bleeding off to the oranges for the jets coming out the back and the lasers firing out the front. Just a beautiful piece of artwork. The other one, as I scrolled through, that really stuck out, so I just picked 2 to talk about today, is one for Wek Le Monde. So when was that for? That was Zap 64, number 45 in 1988. And again, just beautifully drawn Le Monde's race cars, one coming around behind the other, around a corner. Wek Le Monde, I know this was for a Commodore magazine, obviously Zap 64, but that was one of my favorite racing games on the Spectrum. Really proved that you could actually get a decent frame rate on a racing game out of the Spectrum. Played really nicely. And again, this image, it's a static image, but it's just full of motion and full of emotion, I would say. They're coming around the corner. One car's probably about to overtake the other as soon as he gets onto the straight. And again, it just reminds me of, from back in that period, things like Scalextric's box sets or TCR, which was an alternative to Scalextric slot car racing. Again, another hobby back in the past, don't get me started. But that's the sort of thing that they put on the box to entice you to buy the toy. And this would have, definitely sold me the magazine, if not the game itself. There's just so much coming through in that one simple image. Yeah.
That Wek Le Monde one's great. I mean, the choice of colours is just capturing that dusky period, because Le Mans being a 24-hour race, they go into the night. So instead of going with grey tarmac, there's purples and there's yellows, and it just captured that feeling of dusk and the excitement of racing all in one. That could have been a box art cover for the game easily.
Probably better than the actual box art that they did have on the game. Yeah, you got the sun going down, you got the reflection of the headlights off the road there at the front. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. Wasn't scared to court controversy. I think he came close a few times with some of these magazine covers. We've got zombies ripping their own heart out and offering it up in their hand. There was the one that a lot of people remember was the World Championship leaderboard cover, a golf game. A great game, but it's golf. It's not the most exciting game of games. And he's come up with an image of a young lady sucking a lollipop with 3 young lads in the background just transfixed on her. And then in her glasses, somebody playing golf. There's just a tiny snippet of somebody playing golf as a reflection in the glasses. The rest is just this obscene. Well, obscene if you think about it too hard image. And,
I'm seeing your head. There's nothing wrong with the image.
That seemed fine. That image is absolutely fine. I don't know what you're going on about.
Fine, in my head. You've got arcades with monsters bursting out of the screen, grabbing people. There's all sorts, but it's all so exciting and so well done. And I think anyone listening right now to the show will appreciate, or have appreciated at some point, the art of Oliver Frey. He really did lead the pack with his illustrations in our magazines, and I think the gratitude we all have for his body of work is huge. Ollie is survived by his long-term partner and collaborator, Roger Keane, and our thoughts are very much with him, with Ollie's friends, and with Ollie's family at this time. And I'd just like to say thank you, Ollie, for all of the work and all of the happiness that you gave us over the years.
I'm not sure if you guys have been watching, but the BBC Archive YouTube channel has been dropping some very interesting videos recently.
Yeah.
They really tug at the nostalgia strings. Hey, of course. I mean, what's better than a video about the past? And let's not knock the very thing we're into, but it's a video from the past. There's just so much that comes out in watching that kind of thing. And of course, the BBC were very good at not only championing everything British, but also producing excellent programs on technology and innovation. So Sheepy Tina on the subreddit brought a recent upload to our attention, and it's all about Sir Clive Sinclair, the father of the Sinclair Spectrum, of course, and the C5 electric car. I will call it an electric car. But also things like the Pocket Calculator, the affordable digital watch, and the Pocket TV are among many innovations he's credited with. As the piece shows, if he wasn't inventing something as a first, he was trying to make an existing technology better and more affordable to the masses. Or, to quote himself, to do for 10p what anyone could do for £1. And he says that in the interview. And the video in question, which is well worth your time, as it only goes for 9 minutes anyway, is all about his stab at making a flat screen TV that, as the reporter points out in the piece, could one day perhaps simply be hung on the wall rather than protruding into the room. I mean, an example right behind me, on my wall here every week. We're all used to that as a reality, but back then that was seriously the stuff of science fiction. Not always with a train on it, Dave. Not always with a train. Sorry.
Of course, if you were wealthy enough and you had the space and the skill, you would just knock a hole in your chimney so the whole back end of that CRT could slot into the wall.
Yeah. That would be another way of doing it. Yeah. But I mean, it blows my mind. This was back in 1981, 1982. This innovation, it was being discussed, and we couldn't have even dreamt of it back then. Back in the day, all I knew was that my mates had ZX Spectrums. I didn't really know anything about Clive or Sir Clive. And all I knew is I wanted a ZX Spectrum. And it's only recently that I've learned about all the inventions and innovations that Sir Clive worked on. And I marvel at how much of his vision has actually come to pass in certain ways. Yep, so personally, I really think about Clive Sinclair as a man ahead of his time who continues to inspire even today. And that brings me on to a DIY computer project that, as confessed by its creator, Ivan Farafontov, is inspired by Sinclair computers. Ivan details in his video, shared with us by Oz Retrocomp, his Z80 single board computer. So this machine, as he details in the video and also in the description, is a machine he's built from the ground up, and it features a Zilog Z80 10 megahertz CPU, 8 kilobyte ROM, 8 kilobyte VRAM, 48K RAM, 2 serial ports, so 9-pin serial ports that are controlled by a Zilog SIO IC, 2 Atari-compatible joystick ports. Sorry, those are the 9-pin ports. They're controlled by the first Zilog PIO IC, an AY sound generator by General Instruments, a completely custom mechanical keyboard, which has the second Zilog PIO IC chip, and a Zilog CTC clock chip servicing blanking video interrupts. And yes, most of that is complete Dutch to me, and I'm quoting directly from the video description. The whole thing, as he mentions in the video, is built then from readily available brand new parts, with the exception of the AY chip. It's mounted in a very sleek-looking grey-painted 3D printed case, and the mechanical keyboard mentioned before is, again, fully custom with its own special PCB. Ivan says in the video description that this is basically, he describes it as the Sinclair ZX Spectrum personal computer reimagined. It's what I wanted it to be, is a direct quote from what he says. And the best way I can describe this to the listeners is, imagine an Acorn Electron, but in grey. But it booted up, and it boots to a white screen with a black screen with a white command prompt, similar to the Acorn. But obviously with internals that are more like the Spectrum than the Acorn Electron. Around the back, envision all the required ports are integrated with no need for add-on cards. But of course, there's no expansion edge connector either. And before we get into what he demos on the machine, what do you guys make of this? Neil, have you had a look?
Yeah, it's very grey, isn't it? It's very battleship grey, I would say, is the colour. It's a fun-looking project. Just going back to the BBC Archive that you mentioned, the BBC Archive YouTube channel, well worth a visit. But if you go there, go to the Retro Tech, go to their playlists, and they've got a whole playlist called Retro Tech, and it's got everything there from a program in 1964 about Concorde. What else have we got here? Moog synths. The car that runs on chicken poo in 1971. What is a computer virus? Interview with Clive Sinclair. Paul Daniels on computer games.
I like that
and
one.
Quite a funny one to watch. Kenneth Williams presenting a thermoelectric watch. So it is... I mean, imagine Kenneth Williams presenting a science piece. It's everything you would expect from Kenneth Williams presenting a science piece. It's brilliant. So there's loads of great things to watch in that. Coming back to this computer itself, I love the fact that he said it is the ZX Spectrum that I wanted. It's his own ZX Spectrum Next, if you like.
True.
It doesn't matter that somebody else has done the ZX Spectrum Next. And there have been loads of other clones over the years and expansions on the ZX Spectrum, particularly by... people in sort of Eastern Europe who really were using the Spectrum late and then developed it further, and then in fact got involved in the ZX Spectrum's next development and things like that. So loads of people have said, what did I want the ZX Spectrum to become? And that's no reason to stop doing it yourself. This is one of those things where nobody has the right to say to you, "Why? What have you done that for, mate? Why have you done that?" Because I could and because I wanted to. And those are some of my favorite projects. It's a really neat looking board. He's built it from the ground up with joystick ports on, which indicates to me that he wanted to have some fun with this from the start.
And two, not just one.
Yeah, two D9 joystick ports. He shows a demo, which you mentioned you want to talk about in a minute, Chris, so I won't go into that. In that demo, I didn't see any color clash. So his graphics card, which he's implemented on a CPLD chip, it appears to be an improvement over the original Speccy, although I've only seen one thing demoed on it. Yeah. But it looks like he's taken that and gone, well, this is how I wanted the Spectrum to evolve. This is what I wanted better. The AY chip we had in the later Spectrums, but he's added that into his. So just piecing it all together, I guess... what he's made is an Amstrad CPC, right, Chris?
Oh, watch it. Oh, didn't see that coming. No, it's not at all. No. What it really does, actually, and I've got one sitting right here in front of me on the desk because it's always there, it really does remind me of the Acorn Electron, especially the fact that he's implemented a proper, full-size keyboard, and it's a mechanical keyboard, so that really does hark back to the Electron. But yeah, with similar to Spectrum internals. That's a question. Would Sir Clive have won the BBC contract if the ZX Spectrum had come out looking like this project? That would be an interesting alternate reality.
It's not the first time that question's been asked, is it? Because we had a story some months back where somebody created a Spectrum of their own based on that question. Could this have won the contract if Sinclair had done this? And that was an interesting thought exercise as well. Yeah,
it's true. So what does he demo on it? Well, he demos basically some of the commands that he's got built into the ROM, and shows how he would then load a game. And the game that he loads is a custom version of Balderdash, which seemed to run very smoothly. And as you said, Neil, didn't seem to have any color clash, ran nice and fast, smooth scrolling. And then he comes out of that and he boots into a custom tile editor that he wrote himself and explains how this tile editor that he used to customize the version of Balderdash that we had been seeing in the demo before.
Yeah, I couldn't tell if it was color clash or not because I think every sprite that was on there was a square. So I don't think there was any overlap to be able to actually say if there was color clash, but I'm assuming that he's developed that. Yeah.
One of the important things to note here is even though we're referring to it as his vision of the Spectrum, it isn't Spectrum compatible, and he is very clear in that in the video. So yeah, but it's a nice little project. I like it. Did you have a look, Dave?
Yeah, I did. Before I go on to talk about the Spectrum, I want to lament the type of programs that the BBC used to make compared to modern telly. It's been a long, long time since they did these properly informative things, and instead they pander to clickbait and drama. I always watch these old things with a touch of melancholy for the time that we used to look forward to the future rather than graspingly at what we have for fear of losing it. It's always interesting to hear the tech pioneers talk. Often they seem to be saying the things that they want you to think that they are thinking rather than what they're actually thinking. Alan Sugar and Steve Jobs in particular. But Sir Clive is right on everything he says here. He really did bring tech to the masses at a low price. I don't know that the television was a complete success, but that doesn't mean he wasn't trying to do it. And you could see that it wasn't just vaporware. You could see he had a working model of the television there. And there was a single line that stood out, and it said, "At present, Sinclair has got just a pilot production line underway next door to his old premises at the mill. So bald, bearded man bringing amazing technology to the masses who's based in a mill. Ring any bells, Neil?"
Well, didn't he marry a couple of strippers along the way as well? So
yeah, it's pretty much your life story.
I was about to say I haven't quite emulated his life story, but no, Dave knows something we don't.
No, I don't believe Lily watches this, but Lily, I apologise. No resemblance to those comments. Now, I think you're both wrong about the colour clash. When he described how it works, it uses colour attributes, which is what causes causes the colour clash in Spectrum.
Okay.
And people think that the colour clash in Spectrums is a bad thing, and it's a double-edged sword. The reason why the Spectrum was so good is because it used these colour attributes. So it had a block on the screen, and that block only had two colours, the background and the foreground. But you could have different colours in each blocks. That meant that the screen took a lot less RAM, so that you could move the screen around much faster because it had a lot less data in it, which is why some Spectrum games run faster than the Amstrad, even though the Amstrad had a slightly faster processor. The Spectrum had much less data on the screen, so it ran much faster. So people talk about the colour clash as a bad thing. It kind of is, and it kind of isn't. If you design a game around the colour clash, if the game looks good, like Boulder Dash, for example, there, you don't see the colour clash because he's used each of the blocks he's got for Boulder Dash, he's used to match what the way the system works, so we don't get the colour clash. So I do believe the colour clash would be there.
It's like any limitation. Those who master the system stand out through their mastery of it. And you see, even if you don't try and take on the colour clash, games like Last Ninja 2 on the Spectrum, which were just in black and white, looked absolutely superb. So you get great things out of it.
Savage was a large... Oh, go on, sorry.
So there's modern games that use clever ways to get around the colour clash, and they end up having huge sprites, being lightning fast, really zippy, really responsive, really smooth, and you don't feel as if there is any colour clash.
Yeah, and they were. That's what I was about to say. They were doing that back in the day as well. So Savage, which I think is a Firebird title, it was exactly that. It was a sideways scrolling, kind of a shooter, running and shooting. Well, you're actually throwing axes, but large sprites, lots of colour, and you didn't notice the colour clash. A lot slower game, but again, large sprites, trapdoor. You really don't notice it in that either. So they were even doing it back in the day, towards the end of the Spectrum's life, granted, but it could be done. Yeah, cool.
So it's basically a Spectrum, but 3 times the speed. So it gives you a lot of headroom to do things in. So it's not compatible, sadly, but it's a neat little project.
So Ivan has kindly shared all the schematics on his GitHub page. So while this isn't available to buy, must be clear on that, you can, of course, build your own version, as long as you can get the AY chip. That said, in the comment of the YouTube channel, somebody did, the YouTube video that we're talking about, someone did say that they'd like to buy one. And his response at that time was that he may think about selling it in kit form down the track. So he's certainly not made any promises at all, but he has mentioned in a comment down in the comments section that it's something he has thought about at least. So building something like this from scratch is way beyond me. I'll be honest about it. It just blows my mind.
Bet it's not.
Well, no, not in kit form, but doing it from scratch and designing the circuit.
Okay.
Yeah, doing it in kit form. And in fact, doing it in kit form that harks back to what Clive did originally in terms of selling things like the Z80 in kit form so that people could build their own computers at home before they started then using them and programming them on them. So kit form, if this did come out to buy, actually is a nice full circle.
Until the arrival of hard disks, games were mostly constrained to just a few disks, sometimes a little more. And I know that Amiga people are jumping up and down here saying you had games on a dozen or more disks, but the truth is they were hard disk games on DOS ported to the Amiga, which didn't have high-density disks. The arrival of hard disk games in the early 90s opened the door to a lot more graphical content in games. The point-and-click games that we keep mentioning, Monkey Island last week, for example, relied on a lot of data to get beyond the simple Sierra style of graphics. And we didn't get a great deal of speech in hard disk games, but we also got just a little. And it's important to remember that the game still shipped in 1.4 megabyte disks, so you still had to install them from. So they still needed to have a reasonable amount of disks, which meant there wasn't a great deal of content. The next big step forward was CD-ROM games. A CD holds around 700 megabytes. And back then, that was gigantic, absolutely enormous. The difference is just incredible. Even in 1996, when CDs were very much mainstream, a typical hard disk was less than this in capacity. You could get hard disks larger than CDs, but most hard disks were less than a CD in size. Now, one of the games that I remember to come in CD and be enhanced is 1994's Ultimate 8. Now, when it came out, it was on floppy disks. I'm holding it up to the camera you can see here. And it was originally intended to be a CD game, and they went back on that and made it on floppy disks. But they then released an expansion to it at the same time with the speech pack on it. So you could then install even more floppy disks and get it up to what I thought a CD-ROM game should be. But it turns out it's only 37 megabytes in size. So even then, with all that stuff on it, it's still a fairly small amount of floppy disk compared to the size of CDs, about 10%. Now, we talked about the games that were streaming a few weeks ago. We talked about games streaming audio from CD, and that was one way of using up the space. But the big way for them to use up the space was with FMV cutscenes, full motion video cutscenes. And what that means is the CD would contain video clips. I was a little bit behind the curve with the CD because I didn't get one until maybe 1995, so I missed out the early wave of FMV games. Neil, what's your first memories of FMV in games, and do you think they add to the game, or are they a cheap trick?
Good question. I was just thinking about hard disk capacity. I was very quickly trying to find a chart about average hard disk size at home over the years, but I haven't been able to find one quickly.
Well, I did have a quick look when I was doing the research for this, and it was between 300 megabytes and 1 gigabyte around 1996.
Right. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, so 700 meg on a CD. Yeah, I mean, it was significant. I mean, I got my first CD drive even before I had a CD drive in a PC. It was an A570 CD drive on an Amiga. And the thing about that was I wasn't really in earnest running CD-based software. I was running floppy disks, which were archived en masse on a CD, extracting them from the CD and running them. There were CD games. There were things like SimCity, which had a few extras thrown in, and music and stuff like that. But I wouldn't say I was really using the CD to its potential outside of its floppy archiving potential. And you're right. I was one of those Amiga users jumping up and down when you said it, because I had a copy of Beneath a Steel Sky, which came on, I think, 14 floppy disks. Didn't have a hard drive to install it on. And later a talkie version would come along that made full use of the CD. Now, I can remember the first CDs I ever bought for PC, and that was when I got my 486 Packard Bell PC. With it, it came with a bunch of multimedia titles, edutainment titles. There was the Animals, which was a tour of San Diego Zoo with little postage stamp sized videos and things like that. But of course, the big games at the time, well, I'll come on to those, but the games that I bought at the time to go with that were Day of the Tentacle and TFX, the flight sim. So both of those were available on floppy disk, but TFX had an added CD version of the soundtrack, which if you got it on floppy disk, it was a MIDI soundtrack. So they'd essentially piped the MIDI music through some really high-end equipment, recorded it, and released it as the CD version of the soundtrack. And also Day of the Tentacle, which was available on floppy, a LucasArts point-and-click adventure with added speech. That really shone because it was making full use of the VGA, 256 colors, the hard drive capacity to have these tremendous animations in there. It really did feel like you were playing a cartoon, and then to have speech layered on top of that was superb. I'm not going to talk about Ultima 8 because it's an absolutely atrocious game that was released way too early. We could talk about that
Imagine
all day.
Platform puzzles in an Ultima game.
I know. Pixel perfect platform jumping. Ugh. But the two games which I didn't actually buy, but I did play, of course, everyone shouted about in this new era of CD-ROMs, was Myst and The Seventh Guest. Did either of you buy those? Can you remember?
Not at the time.
No. Played a demo of Myst.
I've got them now. They're on my shelves now.
Yeah. Same.
No, I have, of course, played them. They're a big part of gaming history, but I was really wary of them. I wasn't going to go out and spend my money on them. They were pretty expensive. FMV games carried a premium when they came out, although Seventh Guest did start getting bundled with anything and everything in later years. I just knew I couldn't trust the screenshots. I mean, we grew up with 8-bit micros where you had the arcade version and the 16-bit version on the back of your Spectrum or your Amstrad tape. So we were all a bit dubious about screenshots. I knew that these weren't these sandbox, fully immersive 3D worlds that you could freely move around and explore. I knew that. They were fun puzzle games, of course, but they were largely videos with junction points. And the reason I think I was so cautious and savvy to them is because I had previous experience. Dragon's Lair, Space Ace. It had been done before with the Laserdisc format, and we knew this was too good to be true. So I think those of us who'd had that experience were a little bit more cautious about it. So I was very much on the side of things like the Sierra and the LucasArts games with speech added on top of an already superb game. Flight sims with some radio chatter added in or some extra scenery, games with some cooler music, but the gameplay had to come first in those early CD-ROM years for me. It did get better. They did find the balance, and I think one of the perfect examples of that was Under a Killing Moon, which was a 4-CD detective extravaganza, which had a 3D world you could explore with cutscenes, with acting. Who did you have in there? You had some pretty big names in there. James Earl Jones was in there, Darth Vader himself. You had all sorts of actors in there. And yeah, they did manage to bring it together. But even LucasArts came close to slipping too far into the FMV world when they came out with games like Full Throttle. But they did quickly correct themselves and pull that back. And Sierra, they went all in. They went feet first with like the 7-CD movie epic of Phantasmagoria and other games like that. So it was really quite hard to avoid FMV in games at its peak. It was an exciting time, but we all know how it played out. Yeah.
Command & Conquer is another one with the full motion video cutscenes in it, and they were awful. We now have a remaster of Wing Commander 4. The Kilrathi are out of the picture, and Chris Roberts isn't making this one. I understand that by 1996 he'd already started work on Star Citizen, which has been in the works now for 42 years. That's a lie. It didn't start working until 2010. He was involved with this one, but not as much. He was an executive producer rather than a producer of it. So I'm presuming he was in the background somewhere. The Wing Commander series is Origin, who made Ultima. It's their space flight combat sim, heavier on the combat than on the sim. And this time the game is deeper and it's less black and white, with the Kilrathi not being present as the main protagonist. The FMV in this one is really well done, and that's the big deal with this series. They got A-list actors in. They got Mark Hamill, who is Luke Skywalker, but also superb voice acting, Malcolm McDowell, John Rhys-Davies, and as I said, the FMV in this game is really well done. This is the first game that I can think of where the FMV was maybe up to weekly sci-fi drama series rather than the usual unrehearsed drama club where nobody's got any idea what's going on.
You'd rate that above Wing Commander 3, would you? Because that's when Mark Hamill first appeared, and they had FMV coming into the series.
Yeah. So this is where they really got. Wing Commander 3 when they picked it up, and then this is where it really settled, and the story's much better here. It's much deeper. It's much better done. I'm not saying Wing Commander 3 is bad that way, but this is where it really all gelled together. This is for me. This is a great example of when CDs unlocked FMV for games. The theme's a bit different as well. The previous Wing Commander vibes of World War II fighter pilots are still there, but there's far more going on here in the background. There's shades of grey. I won't spoil any more. Now, the article says that Wing Commander 4 hasn't aged well, and I'm not sure I would agree. I think it has aged well, but parts of it certainly haven't, and they're right to identify the full motion video presentation as one of those that can be improved on. But this is one of my favourite types of remaster. It's an unofficial one, and it's done in the way of a fan mod. So you need to own the original game to do it, and I think that stops any copyright problems. I think it stops any ability, plus any desire to shut the project down, because you need to go to GOG and buy the game to use this this fan mod for it. So it should drive sales in it rather than stop sales in it. So hopefully. There. Now, it's not ready yet, but there is a demo, and it looks great, and it will use the original mission files, which in my book is essential. Otherwise, it's a different game. We've mentioned the X-Wing series fan remakes in the past, and this seems to sit along with them, and I'm delighted it exists. Chris, Wing Commander sounds like it might be in your wheelhouse. Do you fancy it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it should be in our wheelhouse. And I remember, talking about FMV and use of CD-ROM, I remember adding my first CD-ROM to my IBM 486SX. And I remember trying Wing Commander back in the time. Well, at the time I was into more, the space games I was into by then were Frontier, so Elite 2 Frontier. And then the much hated Frontier First Encounters, which again is an example of a game that was released too early. It was terrible on release, really, really buggy. But that had two versions. So you had the floppy disk version, which was the bare game, but the CD version, if you got your hands on that, actually had full motion video. So where it had it, and it was actually with an alpha channel as well. So in the floppy disk version, the bulletin boards in the game where you're looking for, there it is, First Encounters. I love that game. I seriously love it.
So did I. I spent loads of time on it. Huge improvement on Frontier.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and you get the Thargoids back again and everything. Yeah. So on the floppy disk version, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and
that's with the patch
on this floppy disk. This is the patch for it. It says Game Tech Frontier First Encounters patch version 1.06, and written at the top of the disc in handwriting, "This patch is a joke." So the person that owned this before me got the patch, used the patch, and the patch was a joke. It has since been fixed. They released, I think, more patches, and other people have patched it, and it's a good game as a result of that. But yeah, famously buggy.
We're segueing slightly, but it's fine. Because with Frontier First Encounters, I had a heap of trouble getting it to run. I was lodging at the time, and the guy I was lodging with, his machine ran it fine. He had a much better 486 than I did. That ran First Encounters absolutely fine. My one really struggled, and the reason it struggled to even run was because I was pinning all my hopes on the minimum system requirements. So I had to actually ring up Game Tech and complain and say, how do I get this game to run? They couldn't help me out, so they said, here's a telephone number. Ring these guys. Who are they? Okay, they're the developers. All right, okay, so let's ring the developers.
That happens these days. No.
Yeah. So who did I end up speaking to? Now, I can't remember obviously you got David Brabham, and who was the other guy?
I don't know if Ian Bell was involved in that one.
No, he wasn't. No. He was.
So I think it was actually David back in the day. Anyway, whoever it was that picked up, and I'm think the way I tell the story in my head, it's like, no, it couldn't have been David. Surely I didn't get to speak to David, but I actually think it was. But anyway, whoever it was, they basically talked me through making a larger swap file to basically use a file on the hard disk as additional RAM is essentially what that does in the code. And that got the game off the ground for me on my 486SX. Still was a bit choppy. But anyway, let's go back to full motion video. So in that, the floppy disk version on the bulletin board, everything was just static graphics. And on the CD version, some of those characters were actually replaced with really, really poor actors pretending to be, somebody wanting to, get a ride across the galaxy on your spaceship or whatever, or give you a pirating contract or whatever. So, yeah, there was that use of CD as well.
Nice. I'm going to bring us back on to Wing Commander, the topic of conversation, because
so it was Wing Commander.
That's what we were talking about.
Wing
so I was
Commander.
actually playing that this week. The reason being, I got an analog flight stick for the 3DO and a copy of Super Wing Commander, which is just Wing Commander, I guess, patched, improved. It's got a far nicer looking menu system, sort of a grittier, because the whole menu system is based on walking around a spaceship, isn't it? A starship, and then you get into your fighter and fly out of it. So that's all been overhauled. There's FMV sequences, and I can play it with an analog stick with a little throttle on the side of it on the 3DO. It's a really nice experience to play it that way. I had Wing Commander 1 on the Amiga 500 back in the day, which I absolutely loved. But if I get back and revisit now, it's a complete dog in terms of frame rate and load times. And then I didn't have Wing Commander 2. I went straight to Wing Commander 3 on the PC. So that's when the FMV kicked in. I didn't go any further with the series on that. I played Wing Commander. This is what I tend to do. I play a game to death, and then I'm not really interested in the sequels because I feel like I've got everything out of it. I feel like I've exhausted it, So I never went to Wing Commander 4. So actually, to try a remastered modern day version of Wing Commander 4 would be a perfect way for me to get back into it. Yeah, I'd like to try this.
Yeah. And same for me. I mean, before I got distracted by Elite Frontier, that's what I was going to say. Basically, I dismissed this back in the day. I dismissed the whole series. Wing Commander 1 and 2 didn't even come on my radar. Number 3, I'd heard it had, Mark Hamill in it, and I heard about the full motion video sequences, but I just dismissed it as a poor X-Wing clone with gimmicky FMV thrown in. So it would be interesting to have a look at Wing Commander 4 remastered and, use that as my first experience.
Yeah, so in my opinion, this is very welcome. It's something I'm really looking forward to. I will, I'm sure, play it eventually. It's one of the things I'm holding up Wing Commander 4 there, so I've got it ready here, waiting for when it arrives.
Box.
Nice.
It's a big box. You compare it to Elite, it's slightly bigger than that. Yeah. So for viewers at home, for people with a black and white television, it's slightly bigger. Yeah, it's a big box. I think that was towards the end of big boxes in 1996. Yeah, and they were wondering what to do. Let's make them even bigger. Was their lack of ideas? So yeah, I love this type of idea. Of the idea of doing it as a mod. No one can. I don't think anyone can object. No one's taking money out of someone else's pocket, and we end up with a much better game to play. So
where can I get it, Dave?
You'll have to wait. Duncan will put a link in there to the demo, and you can look at the video online. I tend not to look too much into previews because I think there are too many spoilers. So I just watched a little video on it. And it looks great. It looks absolutely great. They've improved everything. So wait, and you'll be, if you're patient enough, it'll come out eventually.
It's time now for our community question of the week, and I've been really looking forward to this one. I'll just remind you what the question was last week. I honestly haven't peeked at the subreddit yet to see what the answers are, so this is going to be genuinely the first time I've read them. Do you guys have a sneaky look in the week, or do you wait till the show?
I've had a look today.
You've had a look?
I've not had a look. Normally I have a look, but I've not had a look today, and I'm glad I've not had a look because these ideas... Sometimes the ideas submitted are really daft, like the Golden Axe in VR, and sometimes they catch us unawares, like Daddy Milk.
Yes. Okay, so the question of the week last week was, pitch us your ideas for a game-to-movie adaptation. We don't mean things like Tomb Raider, which already has a plot. We're looking at simple games, such as Pac-Man, which have no real plot to speak of. What would your choice be, and what would the story be? So I think Dave's had a look. Opening the page. Dave's already giggling, so I've
laughing his head off.
Okay, so the top answer is a very short one for me to read out. It's from Oz Retro Comp has submitted this, and he simply says, Doom, the musical. That's it. It doesn't elaborate.
Read out the reply.
And then Suggestive Parsnip has replied, featuring the smash hits Any Imp Will Do, One Night in Phobos, Strafing in the Rain, If I Was an Archvile, and the unforgettable Don't Die for Me, Armed Marina. That's
Brilliant.
Superb. Lovely team up there. Suggestive Parsnip and Oz retro comp. Doom the musical. We want to see that happen. Who's going to read the next one?
Dave.
I'll do it. We're not having the fight we had last week. Kun Mang says, the paperboy was having a bad day, a really bad day, after bratty neighbourhood children, this is a novel by the way, after bratty neighbourhood children missed throws and nearly being flattened by a car backing out, the final straw came when the paper he just threw flew apart, content spreading everywhere. And worse, the inflatable jack-o'-lantern on the lawn seemed to be laughing at him. What he did next was he would soon come to regret. He locked his eyes on that pumpkin with a twisted grin, took aim, and shot off, ready to give that holiday decoration what it had coming. Too bad he didn't notice the tree right behind it. He woke up to a twisted version of the streets his paper route. Is this for real? He asked himself. Am I in some sort of coma? Ahead of him, he could see breakdancers, people pulling out and back into the driveways, kids playing, weirdos on unicycles. Unicycles? As he rode, delivering papers as he did, he noticed a dark house and looked at the gravestones in front. Just then, he collided with the Grim Reaper running at him. The what? As he picked himself up off the ground, he noticed the gravestones had changed. He could see a couple of letters appear, the first two letters of his name. His heart sinking, he knew he was in trouble. What would happen when his name was spelled out? He was sure nothing good. If this was a coma, would he? No, he couldn't think about that. He would just have to keep delivering his papers and hope that he didn't find out. Watch Paperboy and see the careless news carrier as he winds his way through people and everything, in fact, seeming out to get him as he tries to get his papers delivered on Easy Street, Middle Road and Hard Way. Can he do it? Will finishing the route wake him up? Watch Paperboy and find out. Look for the full immersion 360-degree video movie next year when you really do become the Paperboy.
Fantastic.
Thank you for trying to get me to laugh in that, Neil.
Bravo. Sorry, I don't know if that will come across, but I was playing the Paperboy arcade music in the background as Dave was speaking. I don't know if that actually gets recorded in the podcast, but that's why he was
a copyright streak.
Well, we could hear it, so in theory it's recorded. So yeah.
Paperboy the movie. I mean, it's a pretty simple premise, the Paperboy game, isn't it? So there you go. I want to watch that now. I've been talked into submission to go and watch that one.
I like it. All right. There's only one
Chris,
left.
Do you want to read the third one?
Yep. So from Dave Dev Retro, Dungeon Keeper, a fly-on-the-wall documentary following Kevin the Imp as he gets to grips with the trials and tribulations of dungeon life while fending off the advances of Matilda, the Dark Mistress. There you go.
Yeah, I'm up for that. Apart from, I wouldn't be fending off Matilda's advances.
I was confused by that. Yeah, why?
Come on,
why?
I can see that being a Netflix series.
Yeah,
that would work.
That actually would work as a Netflix series. Yeah.
I mean, we've had Lucifer, the cheeky devil, the series about that, which I think I got through 2 series and then they were stretching it out a bit much.
Fine.
That was enough for me. But a series of Dungeon Keeper, that could be fun. Yeah, nice. Good.
Shall we do some more because there's so many submissions?
Yeah, even if we just do the titles, I mean, the next one came from Sundance at GE. Tetris X Bob the Builder. Hang on, I'm going to have to read this one now.
Is it like a Tetris cross with Bob the Builder? I don't know.
Well, let's find out. Maybe it's Tetris crossed with Bob the Builder. The story of a man whose passion for building houses all of a sudden turns on him as everything he completes suddenly disappears. On the quest to find answers why this is happening, NASA issues an alert of giant cubic objects heading for the Earth, and only he can save the Earth if he manages to align them just right.
Nice.
Yeah, that works.
Mm-hmm.
Any others stand out for you guys?
You asked for it, so here it is. Pong the Ultimate Challenge. Featuring Tom Cruise as Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal as himself, and Dwayne Johnson as Novak Djokovic. The trio is accidentally uploaded into a mainframe when an electric storm hits a promotional act. Inside the mainframe, they have to play to death in badly made CGI wireframe tennis courts until they manage to overflow the points counter. Oh, yes. Overflow the points counter conveniently coded into an 8-bit signed integer to make the mainframe explode. At the end, only Federer survives because Tom Cruise had the best lawyers to negotiate his contract. Spoilers!
Fantastic.
Wow. Who knew Pong
Very
could have
good.
such depth of story? We've got Jumpman, the sequel to Running Man. Bring back Arnold, give him cybernetic enhancements. Classic sci-fi. That's from Ash Duville. And then another suggestion is Qbert, a lovable alien with an intense fear of snakes. Crash lands in Mexico. You can see where this is going. And after being befriended by some local children, helps them protect an ancient, just-discovered Mayan pyramid from greedy resort developers by creating a force field around it, which naturally would involve lots of jumping.
Very good.
Good answers. I think that's the most participated in question of the week we've had. So do go and check it out. Yeah. There's a lot of answers to read through there. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. I think for this week's question in the week, we should continue the celebration of the work of Ollie Frey. And we'd just like to ask you, what were your favourite pieces of art by Ollie? It doesn't have to be from the computer magazines. It could be from the comic books that he worked on, from Dan Dare, or from the other ones that we talked about. So just go over to our subreddit, reddit.com/r/This Week in Retro, where you'll see the question of the week pinned. Leave a comment, and if possible, a link to the image itself, whether that's the magazine on archive.org or through... what was the name of the website, Chris, that you mentioned earlier? Ollie's artwork website.
Yep, that's a good question.
Is it Oliver Frey Art, was it?
Hang on. I'm having to scroll up through.
OliverFreyArt.com. Yep. Frey is Frey. So OliverFreyArt.com. Have a browse through there and see if you want to highlight one of those in particular. And if you can, share with us your personal memories. Where did you see it? What did it mean to you? Did you draw glasses? Do you remember drawing glasses on your magazines? You'd get your Bic biro out and you'd scribble all over these.
Can't take you anywhere.
What?
Imagine the hate you'd get that if you started bringing out Crash magazines now on a YouTube video and just scribbling on the cover. But they would these.
You get a lot of hits.
Please, in his memory, please deface his artwork.
Don't do that. Don't do that. But this is how disposable things were back then. We treat these things so preciously now. Yeah. But they were so disposable, we'd just scribble all over them. Anyway. The full question of the week will be pinned because I've just gone off and rambled there. So Ollie Frey artwork, let's celebrate it. Let's talk about it over on the subreddit. All the links to that and everything else we've talked about today are in the show notes. As always, thank you, Duncan, for your sterling work in editing our rambles. Thank you, guys. Have a good week. And thank you for listening. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Choo-choo.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave, Chris from 005 Agema, and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Stiles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.